So this panel is titled Getting Our Quadruple Dollar Signs Together, Getting Our Shit Together. And the together part of it is really important. And we're going to talk about public interest technology and collective action and the way that across different models of collaboration in philanthropy, we're working to advance the field of public interest tech. Funder collaboratives, philanthropists working together, can often be complicated and sometimes incredibly challenging. It's hard to define shared impact, and it's even hard to define the topic that you're working on sometimes. And public interest tech has been no exception. For us at Siegel, public interest tech is a broad field that encompasses a ton of different movements like tech for good or civic tech, but also thinks about mitigating the risk and harm of pervasive technology. And that shared definition that we have, that we've been trying to build with across different organizations, has not always been fully understood by the field or even by our fellow philanthropists. And Amitra, when we were talking about this in panel prep, I think you asked, well, aren't you guys really focused on talent in public interest tech? How's that different from responsible tech? But I'm curious, just before we start talking about the collective piece, to talk a little bit about how we're defining PIT. So can you share some more about how you're defining PIT as well?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, thanks everyone for braving this crazy wind. Like, I think it makes us look a little cooler that we're up here and the wind is blowing so hard. So, but I know it's, and the great Caspian folks have put the blankets out, so please use them. Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you, Katie. I think that we think about responsible technology in 3 or 4 different ways. So, and one of the ways in which we think about it is what kind of infrastructure is needed for responsible technology to flourish. And that way of defining infrastructure can be very different kinds of things. Talent and human capital is such an important piece of the infrastructure that you know, folks like you are working on with the public interest table. At the same time, we also think of infrastructure as like soft infrastructure. So what that means is, you know, underneath the internet that everybody sees every day, most of the internet is run open source. And it's run by hundreds of thousands of volunteers mainly that fix bugs in the internet so you can have the internet experience that you want. So we think of that as open source critical infrastructure. It shows up actually when it fails. It shows up when there's a cyber attack. But most of the time, there's people working on it all the time behind the scenes. So, you know, both in terms of like, you know, how do you deal with the inputs into technology? Who's building technology? What kind of models and incentives are in there? When we think about the harms from technology, which communities are being impacted, what are the guardrails we can put in place? How do we make sure there's checks and balances? Today, technology is largely private sector driven and largely concentrated. And a lot of the roots of technological power and decision making stem from that. So we do a lot of work to try and arrest that. And that's not really infrastructure, but it's really important in terms of a power check, you know, and I know you all work on that too. So we do that, and then you know, places like this remind us that ultimately, you can deconstruct technology as much as you want, or you can think about infrastructure, but unless you're building out alternatives, and alternatives that are different, more fruitful, more collaborative, more human, and telling the story about why we all have power and agency over a shared future, we're not really going to get the technology that we want. So we think about it a little bit like that.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. Katya, did you want to add to that a bit on how public interest tech and the intersection with youth, what that means for you all?
Sure. And hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is chilly and windy, but we're doing it. I love it. So I'm the executive director of Young Futures, and we are working at that intersection of youth well-being and technology. And that is something that probably conjures up a few things in your mind when you hear youth well-being and technology, youth mental health and tech, which is probably, oh, isn't social media the root of all evil and we should just get rid of phones and everyone will be fine? That's kind of what we're trying to combat is that narrative. We're really here to move that conversation to a place that is more optimistic and more focused on solutions. And I love being part of the public interest technology conversation because young people are not often being spoken about, and they're even less frequently in the room where solutions are being developed. And so what we do is we're grant makers, and we fund at scale many, many nonprofits that are solving challenges around youth well-being and tech. And we network them together in a community, and we only fund nonprofits that are either youth-led or co-designed very closely with young people, so that we're not a bunch of adults coming in and telling them, hey, this is what is going to make your life better. And so having young people at the forefront and in mind is super important right now, particularly in this rapidly evolving AI conversation. We are not hearing about young people in that conversation barely at all. And we're also moving quickly away from talking about safety and keeping our feet on the gas. And while we're here to say technology is amazing and we want to lean into all the potential of technology for young people, we also need to help mitigate risks and help young people be safe.
Absolutely. And Kate, for you working across such a diverse group of philanthropists, family offices, individuals, how do you define PIT as you're talking to them?
That is a great question. We let them do that. But even just as quick context, so P150 is a network of philanthropy advisors, 400 from 22 countries. We're just 3 years old. And every year we do a survey and we ask, how much money are your clients moving? So 400 advisors. This year, at the end of 2024, that group represents 90 billion in philanthropic capital moved each year. And these are the doers. These are the people that sit between the ultra-high net wealth individuals and the communities that are doing the work. The reason I share that is to say the reason we exist is because oftentimes that wealth holder is going to their advisor, who could be in their family office, who could be their best friend from college, who they happen to tap to move their new $250 million donor advised fund. But they're asking that one person, I'm interested in disinformation. I'm interested in the problems with tech. My kid is getting bullied at school. They ask their advisor, I want to move 20 million to this. How do I do that? That person may just go to their same networks. They may go to Google to find that information. So we were set up to really create an even playing field for sharing information, connections, et cetera. So for helping them define it, we've been partnering with the Ford Foundation. Funder partners, when they fund us, they come in really as a way to share their expertise. So we've been helping with questions that do come up like this, misinformation, disinformation, rather than having what might have been typically like, oh, let's have a tech solution for this, helping them see the bigger ecosystem of where they sit. If you can get ahead of a donor with that philanthropic capital deployment so they don't go down a path of the take the phones away sort of model, it's just that much more impactful. So that's how we've been shaping the conversation as best we can to this point.
Yeah, and I love that because we're starting to dig into what collaboration looks like, right, and what our different models look like. At Siegel, we've been working at the sort of public interest tech table that we've set with some other institutional philanthropies like Ford and McGovern, Pivotal, but you all also have different models of collaboration, and I think as we think about the future of public interest technology and trying to solve for these problems, we've all agreed that collaboration matters, but can we talk a little bit more about what collaboration looks like for each of you and what it looks like to create these kind of networks and why it's important? And anyone can start.
I'm happy to start. Yeah, so first of all, I think the public interest table that you've put together is an excellent example of collaboration and something that's really underscored and understemmed a lot of the advances that we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years. Like, there's a lot of excellent human capital going into the space, much needed, expertise in staffing, excellent research and science capabilities, community-based technologists that are doing stuff that have all come out of that table. So first of all, I think that's been one of the best things we have. So I really want to say, I want to start by saying that. Ultimately we believe in that sort of cheesy saying or proverb, right? Like, if you want to go fast, you go alone, and if you want to go far, you go together. There are times when philanthropy has to go fast. Philanthropy is actually terrible at going fast. So we really can't slow down even a bit sometimes. So there are times when we work alone, there are times when we take risk. We have a hybrid structure that allows us to do a lot of C4 funding, a lot of advocacy and lobbying. There are times when we work with partners directly in the field on the ground, and the impetus that we need to go quickly means that we're actually working with fewer people, but with a very targeted objective in mind. But most of the time, that's not what's happening. Most of the time, we realize that we can't do it alone, that we need other people to have a shared understanding of the field, a shared analysis of what needs to happen, a way to bring many people together to add different skills and capabilities. And in those cases, we'll be parts of tables, we'll be parts of funds, and so on. One of the things, for instance, that Katya and I have worked on recently together is the Responsible Tech Youth Power Fund, which is a a way to bring kids and parents' voices, kids and teens and parents' voices into advocacy and social change in technology. It's fundamentally different when kids and teens tell you what needs to change about their experiences of harms or good things on the internet than it is when, 75-year-old senators are doing the same thing. So we've seen the power of using different narratives and different voices. So when we collaborate, it's because we understand that broadening the tent of who is seen to be part of the technology conversation is extremely important. What matters to workers when they're worried about jobs and automation, what matters to faith leaders and veterans and all of the people that will eventually be left behind when we cut Social Security and Medicaid, as it seems like what we're going to do. Bringing kids and teens and others in. These are ways in which you have to collaborate. So for us, collaboration is partly with other funders because we need to expand the pool of what's available. But a lot of the collaboration for us is really with broadening the set of voices that can speak for and have agency in shaping technology.
So for us, collaboration is really why we came to be in the first place. Our initial seed funders are Pivotal Ventures, Melinda French-Gates' company, and the Susan Crown Exchange, and they really came together and said, there's a lot happening in this intersection of youth mental health, youth well-being, and tech, and there are a lot of siloed efforts happening. And we need an ecosystem building organization in play. And that was really the initial impetus for Young Futures. And so we have a collaborative funding model in terms of where we get our funding. We have a very big, bold vision to scale our work and support 500 nonprofits in the next 5 years through an initiative called the YF 500. Thank you. And so 500 nonprofits, it's going to take a lot of folks working together to do that. But you only need to meet some of these grantees to realize we need to do more of this, and we need to bring them together in an ecosystem and a community, and that's what we do. We fund them, we support them in an accelerator called Young Futures Academy, and then we build this growing ecosystem, and then they collaborate. And so it's collaboration kind of end to end, but this is something that we all should be talking about when it comes to how young people are doing. The future of our country depends on their well-being. And so I think we need to be able to go fast. We are fortunately set up to be able to work a bit more nimbly because we're a newer organization. We're set up to quickly spin up new funding challenges around topics like AI and navigating phones in schools and gaming in a safe way or tackling youth loneliness. And so that's something that is super helpful because people can just come in and say, that's a topic I really care about and I want to support that and I want to partner with you on that, and we have that on-ramp that makes that a bit easier.
Our genesis is really to collaborate as a network because we're set up to solve that pain point for advisors that sit in silos. But I realize as the more I say collaborate and have over the past year, it's like when you say a word too much and it loses its meaning. Like my 8-year-old was saying oven over and over again, and eventually I was like, I don't know what that means anymore. But I think with collaborate, it's the same sort of thing. What are we talking about when we talk about collaborating? And really it's just about an action. What action is resulting, and what's the incentive that you have to actually come together and do work with others? So for working with advisors, their incentive is to move money on behalf of their client, make the client happy. But then ultimately, that's such an additive then if you can see across all the different other advisors you're working for and see how that money ties up. You're actually able to go back to your client and say, look, so-and-so is funding 50 million here, you're funding 50 million here, we're all winning. So we are set up every time we do a connection or a meeting or an event, we say, what's the action that's going to result from this? And increasingly helping advisors we were talking about this earlier, we don't need to set up big structures to collaborate. It can be as easy as having 10 people knowing they're all funding in mental health. And you say, we're going to fund here, we're going to fund here, we're going to talk, we're going to share, and we know we're all working towards that thing. And that's collaboration for us as well. So it's just getting it out of the realm of collaborate into the real, what are we talking about?
Yeah. And working together is hard, right? Let's not pretend that it is all easy swimming downstream together. It's a challenge, but I think in some spaces it feels really worthwhile and worth digging in. So in public interest tech, in responsible tech, and thinking about the tech future that we're trying to build, why is it particularly well suited for collaboration compared to other funding areas? Katya, can I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, we really have a responsibility here because this is a space that is not very funded by venture. for example, and we see what's happening with government funding. There's not going to be a big dearth of government funds coming into this space. So this is a big gap, bigger than ever, that philanthropy can step into. And it's also a huge challenge. And so we have to work together and share resources, share insights, and just not be inefficient, spinning our wheels and all trying similar things and not sharing what we're learning. If you co-invest and fund grantees together, you're able to bring your individual networks, your institutional knowledge, de-risk each person's funding by going at it together and collaborating and just sharing resources. So I think this is pretty much too big of a challenge for any one organization to try to take on alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just say that there's a couple of things to add to that, one, technology is extremely fast evolving, especially today. The dominant sort of philosophy behind technological development today, especially in Silicon Valley, is to make things that are convenient for users. And we love that stuff. But all the externalities of that, all the communities it harms, the environmental impacts, the way in which it expropriates wealth and power and concentrates it, all of those things are forgotten. So if we don't stand as philanthropy to say, actually there's a public interest here, there's a better way to do technology, we have to center the people who are being decentralized, externalized in these technological philosophies, we're never going to get a better alternative in the future. So I think that's a really important thing. The other thing is just something, my CEO likes to say this all the time. There's 75,000 coffee shops in America, and there's 27,000 dry cleaners. And there are more philanthropic trusts than the two of those combined. Everyone knows Mackenzie Scott and Melinda French Gates, but actually it's a long tail of really small philanthropies that do most of the work. And they just can't do it alone. It's going to be crazy amounts, as you say, of duplication and inefficiency. So if we don't do it together, and this is why, Kate, the work you do is so important, if we don't do it together, then we won't get good outcomes. We just don't have the capital and the scale to deliver good outcomes if we do it all alone.
And on public interest, tech in particular, so unfortunately, a lot of philanthropies I'll check myself. They get set up and they have a clear, funding premise, right? In perpetuity, 5% payouts. They get locked into funding perhaps more traditional things. Public interest tech and these questions that we're getting, it's a brand new space. So you have an opportunity. And I'm working with advisors. If you can start to shape from the very outset, like here's where you can play, and here's how you can fund, and here you don't need to set up a whole foundation. Don't do that. You can actually fund through, Katya's organization. So there's an opportunity right now in this moment, I think, with this topic in particular, to really right the wrong, so you don't get down the line, in 10 years and have to go redo your whole foundation's organizing documents and try to change the payout from 5 to 6%, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, everyone's favorite is like, oh, sure, $1 million more. Like that's going to really impact the whole field and solve all the problems. But thinking about that and carrying it a bit further, how, when we think about looking for results in this new space that is moving really fast and needs a ton of collaborative effort to see any success, how do you think about measuring your impact and all of the things that philanthropy loves to talk about and share in annual reports?
I think that's the question everyone always doesn't want to answer, so I can see why I'm going first. I think what we've realized is that you can measure outcomes in any... Look, let me take a step back. We think of the digital tech ecosystem as a complex system. It's a nonlinear, complex, fast-evolving system, which means that trying to map linear metrics of success is really hard. It's more like playing the pinball in an arcade, than it is like, rolling a bowling ball down towards 10 pins, right? Like, it just doesn't show up the way you want it to show up. So then we have to think about ways in which the work we're doing can be measured in other ways. So one is, are the hypotheses we have about change, do they actually bear out? And if they don't bear out, do you have systems and learning in place to course correct quickly or double down where there's traction. And those are the things that we say to the board you should judge us on. Or there are narratives that dominate technology today. Are we able to seed alternative narratives? And do those narratives get from fringe to mainstream? That's a really important piece of this. Or are we able to build coalitions that look and feel different, but talk about technology than the ones we had 10 years ago? Like, is there a broader base of expertise and knowledge and conversation and who's in the rooms at the tables that's talking about technology? So one of the things we've tried to do is to be a little bit more instrumental in our outcomes. We're talking about what is happening so that we can set up for change and not just measuring whether a policy passed or failed, because that's really hard to tag all your success on. And the stuff we do otherwise to build the field, to make the ecosystem more resilient, more capable, more responsive, is just as important, more diverse, is just as important as do we get a specific child's law passed or not. So, and to some that might feel like but that's how we do it.
I think it's real. I'll give you +1.
So we talk about measuring impact a lot, and it is hard. It's super hard, especially when you have an indexed approach to your work. So for us, we're supporting so many nonprofits who have different types of programming, serving different types of young people in different ways. And so one measure of impact across an entire portfolio is super challenging. Our overall goal, our 10-year BHAG, is to make sure that every young person and family in this country has the tools and resources they need to thrive growing up in a tech-filled world. So how do you get there? What we're doing, the way we think we're going to get there, is by supporting innovators at scale, hundreds of them, as I said. So we look at impact in terms of how are they doing and how are we doing at helping them. So we have our accelerator that helps them. We set goals at the beginning and at the end, and how did they achieve those? And then as we track their progress over time, are they able to raise additional funding? Are they able to scale the number of youth they're serving? And are they able to develop a more sophisticated methodology to track whether or not what they're doing is effective? So those are some of the ways we think about it.
Go for it.
I'm passing on that one.
Oh, and we're really fortunate at Siegel, I think, to be inquiry-driven. So for us, we're similarly thinking about the hypotheses we have, how they're moving, what we are learning from success or failure, and whether we're making a difference in what our peers, fellow funders, practitioners know about the field and how they operationalize their work as well. So I think it really is, it feels a little soft or ephemeral, but I think in a space like this, that's what we have to work with, and it often, I think, makes a lot more sense. And there are other fields that I think wish they had the freedom to be thinking about their hypotheses a little more actively and working this way together. Thinking about just the challenge of power. We have, in philanthropy, a lot of institutional power, working with nonprofits. We're constantly being mindful of that power dynamic. And then when we're working together in collaboration, when we're working together across different types of work, networks, advisors, how do you think about balancing the power dynamics and addressing the inevitable innate inequality that comes with trying to be at these tables, advancing solutions to such a broad challenge?
I can start with that maybe. I think I was talking with Katya, it comes down a lot to incentives. So in our case, we've set up, I think a lot of philanthropy networks get set up. If you were in this world, they charge membership fees and you go to conferences and all that. We were set up, we don't charge membership fees. Rather, we have advisors come in and say, you need to participate, you need to complete our survey, or we're going to kick you out. And I just did some of that last week. But I say that not to be aggressive, but to say, the intention needs to be clear. I don't have an incentive then to bring someone in who's going to be trying to make everyone, fundraise from other people. The incentive is truly to move more money and share. So it keeps the incentive structure clean. And it also lets the advisors know they're coming in. They're like, someone else, they're willing to share. This person's going to share their incredible, just as an example, we have a Google group listserv. Everyone says they want a tool to share resources. Everyone's on email still. But last year we had thousands of conversations on this, and the questions that come up are like, has anyone done anything on higher education for marginalized populations in the global south? And there were 30 responses of like, here's my due diligence, you should talk to so-and-so. Like, so you need to set this up in a way like to have the incentive structure be clear, and that like will enable you to be free to work together. And it does then take that power dynamic out of no one person's ideas are better than the other coming in that case. So yeah, that's how we approach it.
I would say it starts with who you're choosing to work with and partner with and making sure your values are aligned. So if you're starting from a similar place, you're being really transparent. These are my values. These are things that are non-negotiables to me because of incentives and whoever I report up to, whether it's a board or a family, et cetera. And you're just coming into it with a real place of we all have the best intentions to serve here. That's when we see the most value. Hello. That's when we've seen the most healthy relationships. And yeah, there's going to be someone in the room that gave less, funded smaller than someone else. And if you can kind of name that early on and put that aside, and hey, we're here to serve each other here. Everyone is here for a reason. So yeah, it can certainly be hard. And I do know some larger funders have different policies. Like, okay, if we give X% of any sort of collaborative initiative, we won't sit on the board because we already have so much influence, for example. So there are sometimes, sort of guidelines that you can put into place like that.
Yeah, I think one of the things so first of all, we have to be fully honest about the fact, as you say, that the structural relationship, the structural power dynamics are not avoidable. That's where you start from, right? And then we try to think about it in 2 or 3 different ways. So sometimes, by the way, we are, we're like a rounding error in the World Bank's catering budget, right? So, but the World Bank happens to be one of our grantees. So like sometimes the power dynamic is the opposite of what you think. Or we are for-profit investors and we'll sometimes fund startups, but we also own an extremely small stake in Anthropic. So like, they have a lot more power, and believe me, once you write the check, they don't want to talk to you ever again. So, the power dynamic is quite reversed in those cases. But most of the time, to your point, we are actually working with grantees and partners that require us and them to be in an honest conversation. And the thing that we're most trying to say with them, I think, is to say the power we're actually fighting, or the change we actually want to see, or the people we actually want to influence, we're totally aligned on that objective. We want to be shoulder to shoulder with you. Sometimes that's trust-based philanthropy, and sometimes that's strategic agenda-based philanthropy. We do both. But we are really careful in both cases to say, let's orient on the larger goal that we have together. The power of those people, still we're a David to their Goliath. If we want to change power dynamics in the government, we want to change power dynamics in big technology. So ultimately getting things to work for all of us means acknowledging structurally we have more power in many cases, but we're only going to succeed if we're shoulder to shoulder with our grantees, and we try our best to do that, and be honest with ourselves when we fail. We fail a lot also.
Yeah, we fail a lot too, and I'm glad that you said that because it's really important that we all acknowledge that we fail a lot, and failing is part of what moves us forward, and it's part of why philanthropy gets to be risk capital, right? Like, we are trying things, and we need to try things not just because we think they will work, but also because we're not certain, and then learn from what happens when they don't. So shifting gears a little bit, I'm not sure if you've been following the news lately, but stuff has been happening. And we had originally had a question anyway about emerging threats, but emerging threats seem very emergent right now. So I'm curious to hear from you all about how you're thinking about this moment and the emerging threats, and how you balance the rapid response, like you have, Katya, with a long-term focus of, like, we came to this work in public interest tech or whatever else you call it. We came to it with an idea of where we want it to be. The world is changing around us really fast, so what do we do now?
I can start there. Yes, things are happening. And I think we're all trying to protect our mental health with how much media we're consuming. And we do need to, but we still need to stay informed. We're talking a lot about what's happening across the tech landscape, but definitely with AI. And we will be having an open funding call for solutions that can help young people and families navigate the future of AI later this year. So excited about how that is shaping up. I think about it in the frame of young people, of course. And so, as I mentioned earlier, they're being left out of the conversation. And really, checks and balances around safety for young people are hugely lacking right now. I think a lot about digital privacy. There is very little oversight around, targeting, tracking, things like that. Young people are much more vulnerable to that. And then I also think about the growing digital divide. Under-resourced people are much more vulnerable to predatory tactics through tech. And so those are some of the things that I think about when it comes to risk. When it comes to AI, by the way we approach everything related to how we can support young people is those are some risks, those are some harms related to tech and AI, and there's also amazing, beautiful, wonderful potential for these solutions. So let's focus on mitigating risk, making things safer, and leaning into the positives, because this is the world we're living in. So we try to keep it real as much as possible, and be pragmatic.
So just since January 20th, this listserv has been just on fire so I think a couple things. I think on the one hand, we have advisors whose portfolios were decimated with USAID funding cuts and other funding cuts, and so there's a real strong sense of we have these incredible gaps now that our grantees are facing. We want to support them. So just sharing those opportunities that exist, like right now in this moment. But maybe the smallest silver lining with things like AI, public interest tech, things that was like, wow, we need to focus on this now. And all these budgets are shifting and all these resources are shifting. It actually creates what an opportunity for collaboration and to say we this is brand new, we are in new territory, we can't use the old models anymore. And so I think what we are most encouraged by in this moment are seeing, and again, I'm coming through the lens of advisor. When I say advisor, it's basically proxy for the foundation, for the wealth holder. They're like, okay, all that information I got from the Stanford PAX course I took, that's great, but now I need to really change how I'm thinking and move the resources today. And that's not a knock on, I think all these educational tools have been there for a reason, and we're in unprecedented territory. And so that requires us to move resources in different ways.
I just want to say that if the wind keeps going like this, our answers are going to get shorter and shorter. Not longer and longer. And if you have any questions, please wear them now. Because in 6 minutes, we're going to be frozen up here. So look, the first thing is we have to keep our grantees and partners safe through whatever's happening in these times. People are being targeted. People are being accused of things that aren't completely true. People are being singled out. There's a narrative right now that's being pushed in many places that is harmful to the work we do. And we're doing our best to do that while being also cognizant that we can't fill the massive hole that is going to be there because government pulls out, or is being made to pull out, not pulls out. There's large amounts of funding that we just can't replace. Philanthropy is not a replacement for government, and we shouldn't see ourselves as a replacement for government. We are public risk capital for the things that are good for government and the private sector and civil society do together. So that's really challenging right now. And I think also to the positive point, there are some real opportunities. I think this is going to be a horrible experiment in using AI to make government more efficient, and that's going to actually end up with a way greater opportunity to change AI for the public good than we have before. But while that happens, we have to focus on change that protects people in the states through courts and judicial ways, and also through public narratives that change and talk about what's really happening right now. So we're focusing on a lot of those things.
what can we still build and focus on building in this moment that will matter, and still, as we're trying to address sort of the rapid onslaught of things that are coming at us, what's the infrastructure that we can keep building for public interest tech to thrive?
One place I think we have to start is with a lot of storytelling and sharing the vast variety of lived experiences that are happening, across different identities, communities. When I'm thinking of young people, for example, we're doing a funding challenge in a couple of weeks with Pinterest on navigating phones in schools. Seems pretty simple, some people would say. Just ban the phones. Why don't you watch a video of a 16-year-old who is the only English-speaking person in their family and has to translate for their parents and help them get to school, or get to work, rather, or arrange care for their little brother after school. So when it comes to where do we start, just empathy and understanding, and I think storytelling is really a great place to start to kind of unlock that and help shift mindsets around, like, okay, blanket solutions might not be where we should start. Let's first listen and understand the range of experiences that are happening.
I think to complement, from the philanthropy perspective, the infrastructure that you all are building, how best it can and should support, I think is in this continued way of openness, and again, coming through the different ways, like don't go to just the wealth holder, but come to the advisor. Someone out there are 3,000 billionaires, someone is talking to them about their giving. So find that person and make sure that storytelling is really where it comes down to. And so working through these networks that are influencing philanthropic capital, not the traditional ones that you may think about, bring those stories to them. I know I will continue to bring that to them from this conversation going forward. And again, it's all with a view of getting ahead of things so they don't get too far down the line where we can't work back from them.
Yeah, and I would just add, when we look at AI and how quickly things are changing today in the information system, in what's showing up on your phones, in the way in which things are being personalized for you and so on, there's a couple of things that we still think are really important to build. On the positive side, it's really important to build out public access to data sets, for instance, so that more people can build more things from the data sets using AI. Businesses can start faster. NGOs can become more efficient. There's a lot more communities that can be served. But the power to do that has to be in the hands of the communities and the NGOs and the small innovators. And that means the access to public data sets, to compute power, to infrastructure can't be held by 4 or 5 large companies or government, right? So that's a big part of the build focus that we still think we can do today. And the second thing on the more negative side, which is on the checks and balances and guardrail side, is AI is driving down the highway at 200 miles an hour. We need speed limits and seat belts, right? And we may not be able to regulate the technology itself, but there's a lot of appetite to regulate or enforce or minimize the harms that it's causing. So AI does cause a lot of frauds and scams and hoaxes, particularly for senior populations. It's important to have laws against that. AI does a lot of harm on predation and grooming and manipulation through chatbots and companions for young kids and teens in particular. We need to have ways to stop that. Everyone's going to have agentic AI in the next year. So you're going to have agents doing all sorts of things for you on the internet if you want it. And it's really important for us to think about how can those agents work for us and not for the large brands and the enterprises that are going to put them out in the market. So I think there's, clarifying the duty of loyalty for those things. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, still in this space, and we just have to be smart and targeted about how we approach it. But we're not pessimistic for that reason.
Yeah. So I want to take questions from the audience. So this is your 5-minute warning that I will be coming to you for questions next. So ready them, and there'll be a mic down there for you. But Anitra, I want to stick with you for a second because you all have, and you alluded to this before, you have a number of different vehicles that you're able to operationalize for different purposes. Can you talk a little bit about that just as a tactic, like why it's important and how it works to have different vehicles at your disposal to do this work?
Yeah. So our founders set it up so that we're not really a foundation. We're this hybrid structure that started in Silicon Valley like 15 years ago or whatever, that combines an ability to do LLC-based work, which is a number of things that just don't count as charitable giving, right? Like for-profit investing doesn't, lobbying and advocacy sometimes doesn't, and so on. And we retain the flexibility to do that. And then we have the foundation side as well, so we do a lot of grant making as well. But behind that, there's a philosophy about a broader toolkit. And the toolkit includes kind of narrative and storytelling. It includes coalition building. It includes sometimes field building, although we're quite small, so we can only field build to a certain size, and then the Fords and the Siegels of the world have to take over, and so on. And so part of the reason we have that is because, again, it's a point that you've made so eloquently on stage already. Like, we really see ourselves as the risk capital for the world. Like, if we don't try stuff out and fail, we could lose all our money and it would be fine. And almost no one else has that privilege. And so if we don't use that privilege to the fullest extent, which is try new things, try and do better things, try and learn from what other people are doing and make that more, amplify those learnings for others, then we're not really doing our job. So our philosophy on our toolkit and why we're set up the way we are is really for that reason, which is if we don't do and take that risk and, make available more resources for more people in whatever the best use of that tool is. Sometimes it's communications and storytelling, sometimes it's field building, and sometimes it's for-profit capital. Sometimes it's setting a table with other funders. So that's kind of how we're set up and why, I think.
So my last question for each of you before we turn to the audience is inspired by Kate and P150, because you have this diverse network of advisors, and they're not obligated to work together. So as we start with you, but take it down the line, how do you decide when to push them to work together versus when to just say, here's some information and I wish you the best of luck? And to sort of modify that for you guys, how do you know when it's better to work together and try to collaborate versus when you should just try to do something, get it done, and then see what happens next?
I do think it helps how we're set up. I think, again, there just are networks that are set up for sharing. But if you set it up with a way of saying, we said at the outset, you are coming in to share, but ultimately it's about collaborating. But again, with that, not just the night, like, what does that even mean? It means you're going to take action together. You're going to either align your activities, you're going to create co-funding or collective action. So the way we push is if we see conversations on the, again, Google listserv. This past week, we saw one on bipartisan climate action in the shifting landscape. There are a lot of opportunities. We get to work behind the scenes, take that conversation offline, bring them all together and say, listen, y'all are doing this. We're going to map out where you are funding and show you where the gaps are. So our team is basically like jet fuel kind of for these things, where a lot of collaborations fail is when there's a great amount of interest and there's not, like, it often could just be literally someone to organize 3 meetings and some mappings. I'm not trying to make it sound simplistic. Collaboration is hard, but there are missing pieces, and we think capacity for us is that. So if we can put that capacity there to take people out of a conversation sharing mode, that's how we do it. But again, I feel like I'm on a soapbox about incentive structures, but like, you have to know why you're in the room. And as you said, if it's values, and it's also like, what are you being driven by to be in that room together?
We're really designed to invite people in. I'd say we're more of a convener than anything. When we're doing, for example, a new funding challenge like the AI one that's coming up, we're going to be building an AI for Youth Alliance, a steering committee of people who care about this, whether you're a funder or an expert, and definitely young people themselves, folks from the AI industry, et cetera. We need the right people to have a seat at the table so that we can figure out what we should be funding to move the needle. So, what we do alone is kind of set up the system and the container for the collaboration, and then we move forward, with whoever's around that particular table.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say that we have one of those like crystal ball things that you tap and it tells you which one to do. I think the hardest thing in philanthropy is to separate the signal from the noise. We rely on our colleagues, I rely on my colleagues, I rely on our partners, I rely on our grantees to help us separate the signal from the noise. If we have a specific signal that something is needed and there's a distinctive reason why we should start and go first, we sometimes do that. But most of the time, signals are pretty blurred. Like, you kind of have an inkling. You don't really know what's going to happen. It's like, what people do. If you really think you don't know whether your idea is good or not, what's the first thing you do? You go and ask a couple of your friends, or you ask someone you trust, like, is this a good idea, or am I completely harebrained about this? So, one of the ways we try and figure out whether to collaborate or not is if 3 or 4 people at that point say, hey, look, I think you're out on your own on this one. Maybe worth doing, but you're out on your own. Then we go on our own for a while and see what happens. But most of the time, if someone says, no, that's good, but if you modify it this way, or if we can bring this and you bring that, we'll do it together. Most of the time, that's what ends up happening, and I think we're better off for it.
Hello, my name is Leonie Lai. I'm the Executive Director for Open Austin, which is the largest and oldest public interest tech organization here in Austin. And I learned a lot from the grant maker's perspective, so thank you so much. I was wondering if y'all could give some advice or quick actions that we can do, once we get home tonight, about what we can do from a grant seeker perspective to, short of riffling through your pockets, access some of this money.
I can start. I think talk to each other. I feel like I spend a significant amount of time not just trying. I think part of my job in philanthropy is to help nonprofits that may not know each other, or organizations that may not know each other, get together and work together. But I also feel like I sometimes spend time mitigating interesting interpersonal dynamics that come up. And the more that we can get real with each other, like we have to do funder collaboratives, the more that organizations can get real with each other and try to come together to be bringing us actually collective action, it works better and it feels better. I hate when I'm coming from the top down being like, you should work together. And I don't know that actually like you had a fight 6 years ago and that's why you don't. So that kind of energy, when you can bring us, I think, collaborative ideas, I'm almost guaranteed to say, oh yeah, let's try it, because more than one person in the field closest to the work thought it was a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's very true. There are spaces in this sort of, at least the youth well-being in tech and the responsible tech space that you're probably aware of. All Tech is Human is one where there's a massive Slack group where folks can come together. I think what's also helpful is being super vocal about your point of view, and that invites people in, and I'm sure you're already doing this, but one of the most powerful things you can do is a really consistent newsletter and just start sharing what you're up to and inviting people in. And so it sounds like you're already a convener here in Austin by nature of what you explained, but the more you can put it out there and invite people in, that's when some of the magic happens. And within our community of grantees, which is now we have 20, and by this time next year we'll have 50. We're really just a facilitator for them sharing, information on who are the funders you should stay away from, or who had a bad experience trying to do a partnership with such and such company. Those types of things are, the more you can get into the kind of peer network type of setup, that can be super helpful and transformative.
I was just going to say, if you have a good funder, also ask them, don't be afraid to ask them, like, who else should I be talking to? Or if they'd be like, hey, do you have an advisor? Like, let me talk to your advisor. I mean, not to be the advisor has the time and they want to help. So just don't be afraid to ask.
My name is Leanne Buchanan. I wear many hats, but I'm based in Miami, and we invest in companies that help government be more efficient. So what's clear from the conversation is that there's this shared belief that tech has the opportunity to be one of the greatest accelerants of equity and opportunity that we've seen, in large part because it operates at scale. It is a force multiplier. But often where these conversations turn is that is a privileged lens, because we understand how tech operates, we understand how it's distributed, and I wonder how you're thinking about making investments in building capacity for those traditional organizations that are kind of the brick and mortars of social service and social impact, that have not thought about scaling their models, that have not thought about the way in which tech can enable more efficiencies and get to better outcomes, because it seems to me that they are on the other side of a different type of digital divide as it relates to the social impact industry.
At the public interest tech infrastructure table that we've been working on, we recently, just last week, were talking about this in part. We were talking about, we've tried to be a maker of infrastructure for the field of public interest technology. But with what's happening in the world right now, we're now thinking, well, maybe the infrastructure that we need to be worried about is the social infrastructure, the infrastructure that already exists, and how we can help protect it, particularly from digital threats, but also advance it through digital opportunities. So I don't have a full and complete answer for how we're going to do that, but it's definitely on our minds that we need to be helping from cybersecurity up to AI, helping organizations and institutions understand how to be a part of the tech picture. I talk about being techno-pragmatists, which is just my way of saying that, it's a bit of pushback against tech for good, because I think tech for good people often think tech is the solution to every problem. And for us, it's about asking first, is tech a good solution to this problem? Is tech the right opportunity here? And choosing to enter those spaces where tech could be helpful with that frame in mind that, this is not a magic bullet, this is just another tool, one of many. And so I think it also comes that we need to respect the tools that people are already working with in their organizations and institutions and help them see, by learning from what they're doing, how tech can be additive to their mission, how it can accelerate their mission that they already have. I think too often tech folks come in with this mindset that we're going to revolutionize everything that someone is doing, and that may not even be what they want.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that's a great thing, and I think, Siegel, Ford, McGovern, et cetera, do great work on having actually small grants that you can also get that build capacity of smaller organizations. It's a good way to test out what it is you actually need. But beyond that, I would say there's like a simple answer to this and there's a complicated answer to this. I think the simple answer to this is more tech is actually more easy to use today than it's ever been. So the best place to start is by trying out technology and seeing what sticks and what doesn't. It's actually more cost effective today than it's ever been. And so there's a way to use technology today. But that's not what they'll tell you. They'll tell you it's hard, it's complicated, you need expertise and so on and so forth. But I guarantee you, if you go and use some of the technology that's out there today, and you probably have, it's actually a lot more user-friendly than it's ever been. Why? Again, because Silicon Valley wants to make very convenient technology. On the backside, they're going to extract your data and they're going to, violate your privacy, and they're going to have a business model that's not beneficial. But the technology itself is actually quite easy to use. The more complicated answer is technology is just the latest ideology we have. Just like they said about markets will make everyone better off and democracy will make everyone better off, which within its philosophy and worldview embeds a systematic structure of exclusion and bias and discrimination and haves and have-nots. So that's a much bigger fight. And that fight has to be fought with technology the same way it's been fought against free markets, the same way it's been fought against what democracy used to mean when it only meant half the people, right? So I think that's an ongoing fight. That's a bigger fight. That's a fight that we need a lot more voices for. And again, on that fight, people will tell you you're not expert, but don't listen to people who tell you you're not expert, because you have all the expertise you need. You may need some help. Everybody does. I do. But by and large, today, what we really need is more people to fight the fight.
Thanks so much. Randy Wiggins, I'm really excited to be here. I worked with Anamitra. Omidyar is a place I gave my opportunity in Silicon Valley to get here. So I couldn't be prouder, more excited to be back with you. My question is, in terms of what we're investing in terms of philanthropy, et cetera, why are we not thinking about the market factors that the competition thinks about? And until we start to think in that way, and I think one of the most successful companies, that's an example, is probably Anthropic. So Omidyar, he's thinking about this, but he's thinking about it alongside the markets, but also being responsible, right? And that's why you've invested. What does AI actually mean? So I think a lot of times we invest in things that sound good, that could be amazing if they work, but they're out of alignment with markets, with the infrastructure that we talk about. I firmly believe that in the next 4 years, we'll mint the first trillionaire because the guardrails are being taken off by this administration. I think if we don't mint a new generation of billionaires during this time that are focused on the right things, we will have missed a boat. So how should the philanthropic community be thinking about this, identifying those entrepreneurs in unique communities around the globe that have the ability to be competitive from a market standpoint, but can do good as well? We need those folks to continue the funding that you guys are all doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And Randy used to work with us a few years ago, so it's great to have you here, Randy. Thanks for coming. Yeah, as I said, we have, in our history, done a lot of what's called impact investing, which is basically trying to find win-wins between market incentives and social problems. It's a particularly difficult thing to get right. It works sometimes in things well, like financial inclusion and educational technology and some places, and it works badly in other places. And one of the reasons it works badly is because the leading market players will tell you that they succeeded on their own. And pretty much nobody succeeds on their own. Elon Musk got $38 billion of government subsidy to succeed. He's a fantastic applied engineer and a very questionable human being, but what he did is he got $38 billion of government subsidy to get his stuff done. We used to talk about something called priming the pump. Priming the pump was the idea that Google could never have built a great search engine if it also had to build the internet on which to search, right? Somebody wrote all those books, somebody indexed all those libraries, the government, ARPA, which became DARPA, built the internet. And on top of that, you could have the application layers of these great companies that we deify and say that they're getting all these market incentives right. So market incentives are interesting because they qualify and reward a very specific form of success. And part of the reason that Omidyar and a lot of our partners work on things like the tech we want is because we want to talk about, and Randy is part of this, we want to talk about alternatives, democratic alternatives to that story of success. Stories of success that are much more community focused, stories of success that are much more, where the business models are less extractive and actually the value is shared. A really great example a couple of years ago was the Hollywood strikes. We all lost Netflix for a couple of months and it was hard, but on the backside of that, the workers got to say on their own terms, you're going to use AI like this. It's not going to replace our jobs. It's going to augment our jobs. And when it creates value and the pie gets bigger, we all get a share of that pie. And we need mechanisms like that to make the market fair for everybody, even in technology. And so those are the kinds of things we work on. And but it's a complicated thing. I don't think we're going to get it right in 2 years, but maybe hopefully in 5 to 10 years we can.
I think there's another, in terms of how we have the philanthropic community, we know that philanthropy is moving money that is not ours. But we're getting a lot more discussion and seeing a lot more discussion from billionaires, centimillionaires, the 100 millionaires who recognize that they made their money because of tax breaks and they've been able to create these incredible 100 million endowments, and they don't want that system to continue. So they're committed to using their power and their money to change that structure. So what we've seen a lot of, as an example, single-family offices, multifamily offices. Oftentimes, especially for multifamily offices, the incentive is to keep the assets under management high. There isn't an incentive to change that. So they've been pushing back on how do you change pushing to your wealth manager and be like, no, I don't need to have wealth and creation for creation's sake. You need to talk to your bosses and change how my incentive structure is worked, or how your the cold is getting really intense right now with the words. Changing how a family office is considering, it's not about just wealth generation for wealth generation's sake, but that can only come from the person who has the money. So I see that as really encouraging. It needs to happen from the inside out as well.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap this panel by sharing a very quick secret, which is to say that I've been with the Siegel Endowment for almost a decade and in leadership. And when I started, my team will tell you that I was actually adamantly opposed to funder collaboratives. They were almost always an automatic no for me when anyone brought one to the table. And now here I am, almost 10 years later, wrapped in a blanket, talking about why we all need to be collaborating more. And it's because of the way that these people work and the way that our other partners work that has moved my mind. And I I hope that you all leave inspired to collaborate, whether you're on the funder side or anywhere else, because it is worth it at the end of the day. Thank you all.